Okay, so my name's Chris Hewitt, and in this exclusive interview celebrating the 40th anniversary of Camel Trophy, I'm pleased to introduce Paul Leslie Smith from Team South Africa, representing his country in Mundo Maya 1995, and then being invited back for a second Camel Trophy subsequent to that. Paul, thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
Um, Can you tell us a little bit about how you became involved in Camel Trophy? Was there a Camel Trophy following in South Africa? Had there been many teams entered in Camel Trophy, and how did you get involved?
Yep. Okay. Camel Trophy wasn't really that high profile in South Africa up until the lead into 1994. That was the first year that South Africa got back in or got into Camel Trophy and competed with Klaus and Etienne from South Africa being in that team. Before then, there wasn't much in the press. At that stage, I was doing a lot of other sporting stuff. Sort of on the climbing side. Years before, spent a season in the Alps on the skydiving side. A few years before, I'd been with the South African team to the World Champs, and this Camel Trophy call for entries popped up. So, in my mind, I had a stereotypical sort of picture in my mind of like, well, the camel man's got biceps like my thighs, So I thought, well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. So filled in a form. Part of that first form was a psychometric profile as well. So sent that off, and that's where the whole process started. At first, it was just taking a chance, saying, well, I'm doing a lot of related stuff. I know all about navigation and map work and bearings distances, given a few years national service with artillery in the military. And then the rock climbing that I had done, that season in the Alps as well, sort of over years, involved with mountain rescue as well. So rope work, knot slashings, sort of safety, sort of very much there. The part that I didn't have, of course, was the driving skill and the understanding of off-road driving, the mechanics as well, vehicle maintenance, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's how it all started. Started as a joke and a challenge to myself, and went from strength to strength.
Well, the thing is, when you joke about something like this, and you end up having to put your money where your mouth is, and you ended up representing your country on the starting line in Central America. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got ready for Mundo Maya, particularly if you felt that driving and mechanics wasn't going to be your strong suit? How did you address that, and how did that work within Team South Africa?
Yep. That sort of gap in the skill set was sort of something I picked up through the selection and evaluation process, because South Africa started with initially about 20-odd thousand applicants, then down to maybe just less than 1,000 in terms of interviews. And then it was a case of the top 20 from each of 6 or 7 provinces going through to a camp, Bundu camp in South Africa for a couple of days, a day or so, a day and a night of training and day of evaluation. Then coming back for a 7-day period a few months later, where the first half of it was training and the second half of it was evaluation. That was then the top 20 from South Africa. Then selecting the top 4. Top 4 then went through to Turkey, to Balziki Ranch for the international selections. And again, it was sort of a week-long event with the first half training and then the second half evaluation. So sort of picking that up sort of as you go along. On the training side of it, I didn't do anything that I hadn't been doing already. Sort of the average day before that was basically an hour of running, an hour of climbing, and an hour of gym work. But I was doing that already. with a few distractions, sort of for the national selections. I was training with the South African 8-weight team in Florida for the upcoming World Meet. And that was a 6.5 week trip. And in the middle of that, I had to come back for the national selections in South Africa, and then promptly turn around and go back to Florida again to carry on jumping. So yeah, and sort of bringing all those different components that I'd gathered over time, talking about sort of the map work, the navigation side of it, from military, the rope work, et cetera, from knots and lashings from climbing, and sort of the general team thing as well. Sort of all sort of really meshed together through the South Africa selections through to the international selections. And I know with Mark and myself at Balziki Ranch, we were placed 1 and 4, I think, out of the 80 people there. And then the third South African, I think, was 13th, and then the other one was a little bit behind that. So all in the top half.
So a strong showing from Team South Africa, and it transpired that Mark would be your crewmate and your teammate
Yes.
in Mundo Maya. So the Camel Trophy itself was quite a unique event. It travelled, I believe, on a route through 5 Central American countries, which I think was pretty unique in the 20-year history of Camel Trophy. What's your Spanish like?
At that stage, I didn't speak any Spanish, but through work, I was based out of Bogota, Colombia, from 2013 to 2017. So I speak a lot more now. I've done presentations to company conferences where there's 1,500 people, hour long, in Spanish. So it's a challenge.
Would the Spanish language have helped you on Camel Trophy? Did you have much interaction with the locals, or was it you get into the convoy and you're relentlessly moving with the convoy?
Well, it would have helped to sort of when you were going to try and find beer, but that seems to be a pretty common language. When you're stopping off somewhere and you're asking for directions, or sort of trying to understand sort of where different roads are going. But the convoy sort of, if I compare the 2 years, if I compare Mundo Maya to Borneo or Kalimantan the year after, going from Balikpapan to Pontianak, 2 very, very different events. Mundo Maya, yes, it did the circumnavigation starting in Belize, then up to Tres Banderas and Mexico, Belize, Guatemalan border, then down through Guatemala, sort of east to west across the Guatemalan highlands, then dropping down into El Salvador, then into Honduras, and then back through Guatemala to Belize. So sort of quite a sort of circular route, starting at Lamanai, ending at Zenantinich, but very dry event, very, very hot. And so vehicles took, sort of a lot of damage in the sense of, sort of radius arms getting torn off, or sort of chassis damage. And Mundo Maya, we were running ahead of schedule, just because the driving conditions weren't as challenging as expected. So there were a couple of challenges thrown in. The one was a head-to-head, 10 countries versus 10 countries crossing one of the lakes. One of the other ones was this process of elimination, the water wheel, which Mark and myself subsequently won, where you had to carry sand ladder tire, a couple of pelicans, sort of upriver against the current, sort of around a vehicle, back downriver, then up the hill to the finish. So sort of that was sort of Mundo Maya. When it came to Kalimantan, or crossing Borneo, that was endless mud. we had some of the holes that we were pulling vehicles out. We had 5, 6 vehicles on short snatch straps, and then vehicle number 6 or 7 was in the hole on a long snatch strap. To sort of you're calling over the radio because you can't shout, that far up and down the line. And then, of course, the number of half shafts that we broke in Borneo, because of the vehicle sort of snaking sort of while the snatch strap is pulling, and then the wheel sort of hits the edge of the road or sort of a rock on the side of the road, and that sudden change in tension, and you snap off the base of the half shaft. It landed up that a lot of vehicles limped through to the finish on that one. And that middle section, because I was keeping track of that middle section in Borneo with some of the river crossings. We went through a stage for 6 or 7 days. At sunset, we had hit a river, and then it was all night river crossing, and then the next morning back onto the road in the mud again. And in 7 days in that middle section, we did a little over 20 kilometers in 7 days, and that was going, non-stop.
That sounds both physically and emotionally pretty demanding. What strategy do you have when the weather is searingly hot, when the humidity means your sweat doesn't evaporate, you're tired, you probably haven't slept? I mean, can't even imagine what you're eating. What's the strategy for dealing with that?
Never lose your sense of humor. That's probably the best strategy. You've always got to, at some point, sort of when the shit hits the fan, or you haven't slept for days, literally, or maybe a couple of hours in the seat of the vehicle, and you've got to find the sense of humor in a lot of the situations that you're in. I can remember, especially in Borneo, sort of walking up and down the convoy, and you'd see people sort of sitting in the passenger seat trying to get a half an hour sleep or an hour sleep. By the end of those 6 or 7 days in that middle section, people were very white-faced. You sort of don't lose a sense of humor, and understand what's going on around you as well, because everyone is tired. It's if there's anything that shows any weak sort of fracture or disagreement in a team, it's when you're both exhausted like that, and you've just got to sit back and laugh. And if you have got a beer, have a beer. You've got to be able to at certain points just sit back and look at it from a distance. And also, it's the other thing as well is that's when you start making mistakes from a safety point of view. You've got to be so careful when sort of you get to that point where you're completely exhausted, and then you overlook something.
Were there any close calls in terms of accidents or fatigue-induced mistakes?
In both events, the worst accidents were vehicle rolls. One of the journalists had to get airlifted out on Munda Maya, but not critical, but just sort of facial lacerations from windshield glass. Sort of one of the competitors that got injured on a sand ladder as well. A few of us needed stitches at various points, but nothing that serious.
One of the temptations, certainly, certainly the thing that crosses my mind. You described kind of 5 or 6 teams of vehicles trying to pull out a 7th that's stuck in a hole. Well, ultimately, Camel Trophy was a competition. You're all competing for the trophy. Why not leave the 7th team behind and head for the finish line?
Because it's not a race. It's all about the experience. It's yes, you're competing head to head when the special tasks at the beginning and the end. And as any competitor knows, it's sometimes individual country versus country, or you against the clock, or running an orienteering route in the middle of the night, or paddling a route across a lake, whatever it might be. Sometimes 2 against 2, sometimes 5 against 5, sometimes 10 against 10. So that yes, there is a competitive element to it. But the whole thing around, as everyone knows about the convoy, once it gets moving, your responsibility is both the vehicle in front of you and the vehicle behind you. You know, sort of you only able to proceed once the person behind you has moved into where you were positionally. So your responsibility is to everyone else on the convoy. It's not to yourself. You know, and sort of this thing about, winning, you know, sort of, and we'll get to it a bit later. You know, sort of that sort of camaraderie that you get out of helping those around you is what makes events like these so special. You know, sort of you talk to someone who's never heard about Camel Trophy, and it's very difficult for them to relate. But for the people that are there at the event, there's something that you share that you don't find easily elsewhere. You know, you've got to be in sort of a similar sort of sporting or competitive environment where you have that focus on your team. You know, sort of whether it's skydiving or mountaineering or some of the other extreme stuff that I've done. You know, you're only as good as the rest of your team. So, you know, your focus is on them. And the rest of your team is the rest of the convoy. So that's what it's all about. It's getting through it together.
You mentioned skydiving and mountaineering. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your achievements, perhaps since Camel Trophy in those avenues, because I gather you're fairly accomplished.
Yeah, I've been at it for a few years. I went to my first World Championships on the skydiving side in 1991. And training for that, the 5 of us in the team, the 4 of us plus our cameraman, we all gave up work, cashed in our pension funds, hired an aircraft for 6 months, and we trained 6 days a week for 6 months. And that was 91 in Czech. Then on the skydiving side, I went back with the South Africa team in 99 for the 8-way event in Australia, in 2004 in Croatia with the 8-way team, and then in 2012 in Dubai. And then since then, I've got more and more involved in the big way sequential stuff. So, you know, if you went up and Googled 3.217-way world record, you'll see something that we did 2 years ago in the fall, where 10 aircraft in formation. There's 20-something people exiting from the 10 aircraft, building the first formation, 217 people, and on the key, breaking that and transitioning it to a second one. And then on the key again, breaking it and transitioning it to the third one. And there, just like Camel Trophy, there's 217 people from 30 countries around the world. This is something that this group, we do once or twice in the spring, once or twice in the fall. And it takes a very sort of unique set of skills. Not everyone can do every job in that formation. So you become more and more of a specialist. And that's, there's that side. On the mountaineering side, you know, sort of before Camel Trophy, I was very involved in hardcore rock climbing and then mixed climbing. And at one point in the mid 80s, landed up with a scholarship to the International International School of Mountaineering in Lausanne, Switzerland. So I went and spent a summer based out of Chamonix, climbing most of the North Faces. And then sort of after sort of Camel Trophy, that sort of fell by the wayside. I was just getting too involved in work and some of the other sporting things I was doing. And then I sort of circled back to it in 2017. I then knocked off quickly, well, not that quickly, but Aconcagua in South America. That's 22,840 something feet. That's about a 3.5 week trip.
To put that into context, a mountain that's 22,000 feet, that is big. I mean, that's Himalayan.
22,020, just short of 23. That's Aconcagua is the highest mountain outside of the Himalayas in the world. So that's why it's a 3-week trip, 3.5 week trip, because you are acclimatizing to the altitude. Then a month later, I went and did a winter climb on Mount Rainier. And then that was in essence training for Denali. I went or Mount McKinley. I was on Mount McKinley for a month, nearly a month, but we never summited. We got caught in bad weather at Camp 14. Stuck there for 8 days, and that's minus 30 Fahrenheit, 8 o'clock in the morning. That's in the tent. It's a very cold mountain.
Well, before you said that bit, you said you didn't summit, and I was wondering, is that on your list to go back and tick that one off, and then you described a week of having to sit in a freezing cold tent and perhaps maybe that one.
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what transpires. I mean, that mountain kicked our ass, well and truly. But yeah, maybe one day we'll see.
Okay. Well, let me take you from the mountains then back to Central America and Mundo Maya. You spoke a little bit how in your team as in skydiving, you sort of rapidly adjust to understanding who has what skills. You specialize in a particular thing. Did that happen within your team with Mark, your kind of teammate, and also in the convoy? Did you kind of like form little groups within the convoy with other teams, and what particular skills did you bring to the Camel Trophy expedition?
I think sort of that happens at both levels, both within your team and sort of with the broader group of countries on the convoy. Between Mark and myself, I'm a runner. So, when it came to orienteering, Mark would sort of maybe run the central route, and then I'd run sort of out to either side of the central line to go and pick up the points, to go and tag the particular points. Mark's a very strong guy, very strong. So when it came to paddling, when it came to, lifting a concrete block out of the river, that sort of thing, that's Mark's forte. And the two of us sort of got into those roles without even having to talk about it. I was more sort of problem solver as well. So, it was never a case of us butting heads or saying, well, you do this while I do that. Automatically, we would sort of instinctively sort of move into what we could do best to help whatever the situation that the team was in. When it came to the convoy itself, I would suspect that from a technical capability point of view, perhaps not that different to a lot of the other teams that are on the convoy. But one of the things that sort of made Team South Africa sort of pretty unique was this whole sort of team spirit thing, being in it together. And part of that was, a lot of it was driven by one of the cameramen that had been with every single Camel Trophy South Africa had done since '94, all the way through to the last, Marek Patzer. And just like sort of Mark and myself would instinctively between us sort of know who's doing what in any particular task we were given, it was the same thing with the cameraman, the journalists and in the convoy with us. Sort of they would be putting together sort of the tents, doing the cooking, that sort of thing, while Mark and myself were sort of doing what we could to help other vehicles in the convoy, sort of doing what needed to be done to move the convoy forward, or sort of just preparing for what's coming up next. So, sort of typical South Africans, sort of have a lot of other countries around in terms of, okay, sort of bring, potluck dinner, bring whatever you've got, if you've got a bottle of tequila as well, sort of stashed in your car, bring that, sort of, if it was at all possible, we would try and, scrounge some beers from somewhere, or, maybe there's a village down the road where you could potentially go and pick up a couple of beers. So sort of very sort of social in that regard. And irrespective of which other countries we landed up with, it would be a case of sort of interacting like that with them. Sort of in Mundo Maya, the convoy became very fragmented at various points. So it was only in El Salvador and Honduras where, from a security or point of view, it was a case of, the convoy would be together for the evening. Whereas in Borneo, crossing Kalimantan, that was very different, just because everything was so bunched up around some of the big holes and washouts that we had to cross. Literally the convoy would be, half at the one washout and half at the next one, type of thing. So sort of much closer, although in that situation, you sort of cooking or sort of having a potluck dinner or whatever with the vehicles around you. But also sort of, with the convoy, there's always this rotation of vehicles within the convoy as well. Sort of at various times, each country gets a turn to go to the front. Sort of other countries will then sort of drop towards the back a bit. So that through that, you get to spend time with literally everyone else in the convoy.
But presumably that also buys you a little bit of time to kind of recuperate, repair, to kind of not have the stress of being at the front and not pathfinding. Presumably that might be the release you need in a very pressured situation.
And it's the opportunity for you to catch up on a bit of sleep. Sort of when you at that head of the convoy, then you're on the go flat out all the time. There's very little time to stop. And I know Peter and the team in Kalimantan were at the front, sort of out the gate, and that's not an easy. And Peter and Sam. That's what I was thinking of. Sam De Beer, and Peter Correa. But they were sort of at the front, out the gate, and that's a hard position to be in for more than a couple of days. Not easy. And so, of course, when you drop back, sort of you get to a river or get to a bridge crossing, and the people out the front are sort of sorting it out. You will move ahead, sort of walk down the convoy to go and help out. Peter Duplessis, by the way. Sorry, my apologies. Sort of if you get the chance, that's also the opportunity for you to sort of take a quick breather, sort of catch up on a bit of sleep if need be. But it's not for long. If the convoy falls behind schedule, you've got to go.
So what vehicles were you operating in '95? Was that Defender or was it Discovery by that point?
That was Discovery. Team vehicles Discovery. And then in Kalimantan, I ended up driving Defender, a 110.
And I'm imagining that grabbing a little bit of sleep, or possibly even on the move, the Discovery was the vehicle, smaller inside but probably more comfortable.
It's definitely smaller inside. So the Defenders basically form a support role. sort of Discovery also a softer vehicle. When it came to Kalimantan, then you could see the real difference. The amount of damage sustained by the Discoveries versus the Defender. On my perception, there was a difference. Discoveries picking up a lot more damage than the Defenders in that convoy.
And by damage, we're presumably not talking the odd dent and scratch. We're talking about something that would stop them mechanically and prevent them from carrying on, or
yeah, like you snap a half shaft, then you're on two-wheel drive. It got to the end of the convoy. There were a number of vehicles that there were no more spares. It actually got to a point where we were asking journalists to bring through spares when they came out for the end, so that they could airlift them in with the helicopter to the convoy. Yes, you replace if you've got a spare, and sort of fish out the end of it with the gooseneck. And some with like damage to the radius arm. I think there were one gearbox replacement. But no, it's not. If you're on your own in that type of a situation, then you would struggle. Especially in Kalimantan, that the mud on some of those roads, even when you were stationary, just on the camber of the road, you could stop stationary in the middle of the road, and the vehicle would start sliding off one side of the camber just by standing there.
I will get crucified if I don't ask this question from other club members, but maybe you can, and I think I know what your answer is going to be. Maybe you could settle the big debate in the Camel Trophy Club of what's best suited to the Camel Trophy, Discovery or Defender. I think you might have answered it already, but can you put that argument?
If I had a choice, I would take a Defender. It's if I compare the two that I drove, and that's just from my own experience and what I saw going on around me, that Defender just seemed to be able to take a lot more hits and still keep going. If I had the choice, take a Defender.
I suspect no matter what we decide between the two of us, because I would happen to agree with you, I'm sure it's an argument that will continue to run in the club forevermore. But we'll perhaps we ought to move on from that. So, Paul, how was it that you came to be chosen to kind of return with Camel Trophy for a second time? That's not usual, presumably. What made you a candidate for joining the convoy again?
Sort of every year it seemed like they would take back sort of 3 or 4 people from the previous year, sort of to form part of that sort of international group. My teammate from Undermeyer, Mark, went on to do all of these subsequent events. I was there for Kalimantan. We did well in Mundo Maya. Landed up coming second in special tasks, second in team spirit, and second overall. Second sucks, but no. But joking aside, and we'll talk a little bit about sort of most memorable moments and experiences. Sort of maybe a bit later, but sort of having done well like that, sort of across the board, sort of, I think also that maybe the current marshals keep an eye open for sort of how people behave sort of during special tasks and while they're on the convoy, and you can see sort of who can sort of work under immense pressure, sort of with lack of sleep and not lose their sense of humor. You know, and that's at the end of the day, sort of the sort of people that you can do journeys like this with. So when I got onto Kalimantan, oh, fantastic. You know, yes, I've got to go sort of hat in hand to the boss at work and say, can I take off another 4 weeks, you know, to go to the event. Luckily, that was possible. So, yeah, fantastic experience on top of a fantastic experience.
Well, coming second in those various disciplines that you described and the various awards, I suppose we better just pay a little tribute to the team from the Czech Republic who won the Camel Trophy and the Special Tasks Award in '95.
They were fantastic. You know, hats off to them. It's, you know, it's not like, oh, damn, you know, second. They beat us fair and square. They were good. You know, sort of when I was watching them on some of the orienteering courses, no, they were hauling.
And you also spoke about team spirit, and perhaps I'll get you to, for people who don't understand what the Team Spirit Award was, I'll get you to describe it in the moment. But let's pay a little bit of tribute to, I think it was Team Russia, Pavel and Sergey that year. Pavel has attended a number of club events, and whatever team spirit is, he certainly still has it. But perhaps you could explain the Team Spirit Award, because it was awarded in a slightly different way than the
yeah, sort of, you know, Team Spirit is really the country that, you know, or the team that is there sort of helping others and sort of interacting with others around them. It's this whole sort of, while special tasks might be the competitive side, the team spirit is in essence what Camel Trophy is all about. It's that team and those people that are always there helping others around them, and always sort of interacting with those around them. So yeah, again, very well deserved. You know, sort of very well deserved.
And while we're talking about Team Spirit, you mentioned Marek Patzner slightly earlier on, who was a journalist who accompanied Team South Africa for a number of years. We had the pleasure of meeting him 5 years ago when he flew in to visit one of our events. And if you'll let me tell a little anecdote about him, he arrived in a taxi, completely unexpected. And he'd basically turned up in the clothes he was wearing, and within about 3 hours of arriving, he'd sourced a sleeping bag, a tent, and a bag of beers. And having done that, he was then set for the
classic
and quite a character, and we were very saddened to hear of his passing a couple of years ago. He clearly was a big character and is obviously missed. But I think he, you know, the fact that he could be such a big character who is synonymous with Camel Trophy and yet not be one of the participating, you know, competing team members, says that Camel Trophy as an event is more than the competition.
Yes. And it comes back to the whole team spirit thing. And even though you have the journalists in the vehicle with you, you know, sort of for us, they were considered part of the team. You know, sort of it was a case of we could only do what we needed to do with them doing whatever they could to help. You know, and even if it's something as simple as doing camp chores, you know, while we're getting equipment ready or prepping for the next special task, or we down the convoy somewhere, sort of helping a group in front of us or helping people behind us, then Jeff, the other journalist in the vehicle with us, Jeff Dalglish, you know, he might move the vehicle up for us, you know, while Marek is busy sort of organizing, you know, getting some food stuff ready or water ready or whatever it might be. You know, when we arrived in Munda Maya in Belize, some of our food didn't arrive. We had special dehydrated and radiated food. A couple of our cases didn't arrive. So there was Marek running around across, you know, the other countries in the event, plus in Belize, trying to make sure that we had enough for the convoy. And they just to reiterate, they are, in my experience, an integral part of the sharp end of the team. They're the people that quietly get on and do all the stuff in the background that allows the team to get out there, the two competitors to get out there and do whatever they need to do. You know, sort of special tasks, you know, in Lamini when we started. That first day, I think, was something like 47 degrees or 48 degrees Celsius, and incredibly humid. And Marek is not only running around taking pictures, you know, he's carrying water bottles and sort of running backwards and forwards, filling and bringing them back for us. You know, we had finished one task, here's water, here's something to eat. You know, it's not a case of going back to the to where we were camping. You know, it was a case of here's all, you know, sort of what you need. So then we could straight away sort of take a breather, you know, even if it was 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes between the rotations, take a breather, sort of start getting ready for the next thing, and then off we'd go.
So I'd be quite interesting to hear a little bit about sort of the life in camp on Camel Trophy. I'm imagining there's not many plush campsites in the Guatemalan jungle. Tell us a little bit about kind of life off the trail, and how did that work? Did you have tents? Was there an infrastructure? Did you sleep in hammocks? Did you actually sleep and stop at all, or was it literally life on the convoy? How was that flow?
Yeah. Kalimantan was more sort of, you know, that middle section, especially sort of life on the convoy. Quite often you never had time to put out a tent. Often the conditions were too muddy to be able to do it as well. So you'd be catnapping in the vehicle. In Munda Maya, we had tents that actually clipped onto the side of the vehicle, a two-man tent. So just sort of no poles or anything. You just clip it to the roof rack, and then at the end of the rope or the strap, you'd put the peg in the ground. And in essence, that could sleep two people. So it was Mark and myself on the one side, Marek and Jeff on the other side. So sort of pretty quick to set up, and yeah, you're sleeping on the ground. You know, one of the interesting things in the middle of the night, you could the tarantulas, the spiders, used to crawl in sort of under the ground sheet, and you could feel them moving around under the ground sheet sort of during the night. Interesting. But yeah, then sort of and Munda Maya, sort of once you'd got to a point of, okay, this is as far as we're going for today. Because we had more time sort of overnight as opposed to Kalimantan, you would set up camp. You'd all sort of congregate, groups of vehicles, set up camp properly, you know, get the volcano going, you know, sort of brew tea or coffee, whatever it might be, and sort of start prepping dinner, you know, sort of, and then the routine in the morning, sort of, you know, sort of breakfast, packing up, and then hitting the road again. So the pace of things in Munda Maya was much easier than in Kalimantan. Kalimantan, you were grabbing sleep on the fly, sort of grabbing a bite to eat on the fly. You know, very different. And it was a luxury if you found a place where you could actually put out a tent, you know, sort of, and roll out a sleeping bag properly for the night.
Was that a result of Kalimantan being more more challenging, or was that because you were part of the convoy, the coordinating team, the support team? Did you have to work harder than the teams when you were a staff member on Camel Trophy?
I wouldn't say so. I just think the two events were very different. You know, sort of Mundo Maya was more, the special tasks were harder. You know, sort of, and the duration of the special tasks much longer. And then in between, in the convoy, because the convoy was running ahead, so we had a couple of challenges. That one day, just before we got to Zanantanich for the last session of special tasks, we had this water wheel challenge. That was a tough day. You know, sort of when I was hauling up that hill, I could feel I was starting to black out. You know, sort of when you lose your peripheral vision, starts blacking, and all you can see is sort of a spot of light ahead of you, and that was Mark's back. You know, it's sort of a tough day.
Yeah, most people have stopped before that point, but obviously you carry on, and I think that's what marks certain people out as suitable for the Camel Trophy. Whereas I'd much rather just sit down and watch the video of it.
Yeah. That's stood me well. That ability in a lot of things, you know, sort of when you on the mountain or doing some hard, long rock climbs or mountaineering routes, you have days there where, you know, what on earth am I doing here? You know, you're cold, you're tired, you know, and again, it comes back to don't lose your sense of humor. Same thing with a lot of the running that I've done, you know, sort of in 2008, 2009, I ran the 7 continents, Antarctica, and I try to make them special, sort of marathon in Antarctica, Great Wall of China, Death Valley for the US, that sort of thing. And then I ran the marathon majors. So that's New York, Chicago, London, Berlin, Boston, and Tokyo. Did those, with the exception of one of each, did those over an 18-month period, and then got into ultra marathon running. And it stood me in stead there as well, because especially when it comes to the ultras, you know, you're at mile 50 or something, and then you've got a 600-700 foot climb over the next mile, you know, and it's 90 degrees. You know, you can easily have a sense of humor failure because your body is sore, you're tired, and all you want to do is stop, you know, and there's got to be that part of you that just says keep going.
And I think that one of the things we find difficult to understand is that keeping going, that momentum, how you sustain, let's say in Camel Trophy, a convoy of 40 people and 20 cars, how you keep that whole motion going and not lose sight of what you're trying to achieve. It clearly, Camel Trophy was some sort of, was a big promotional event, but it also has to succeed as an expedition, because you can't promote a failure, or well, perhaps you can, but you can't repeatedly. You can't fail every year, and you can have a heroic failure sometimes, and you need things to go wrong in order to solve them. But ultimately, you have to be successful. And trying to keep that momentum up must be incredibly difficult. And I think what I'm trying to get at is when you were involved in Kalimantan as kind of crew rather than participant, what could you do to kind of keep the wheels on the convoy effectively, in terms of encouraging people, and you're clearly a problem solver. How much could you get involved with helping the teams, and how much did you have to let them kind of find their own way out of problems?
in essence, the teams are finding their own way out of problems already. Mark was a driver in the convoy as well, but he was driving one of the raft units. So they're sort of very integrally involved with the teams. Every time it came to a river crossing, there it is, Mark's vehicle, down there with the raft unit, unpack everything, so get it set up, and then taking it apart the other side. So sort of very much more involved in the sharp end of the convoy. In Kalimantan, I had journalists in the vehicle with me. So the primary responsibility is to the journalists first, in terms of, getting the volcano going, coffee going, tea, whatever it might be. Sometimes they would be off with their countries or sort of a group of countries for a dinner or something, and then come back later. Other times they would be with you. So that's sort of the priority. And in essence, you're the designated driver, so there's not much opportunity for someone else to drive. It's a case of you sort of running backwards and forwards. The best thing there, sort of when it came to the other countries itself, is just, I used to walk up and down the convoy. Every time we got to a point where, you hit the next river crossing or the next obstacle. One of the holes in the middle of Borneo took about 36, 38 hours to get all the vehicles through. And that was one of these ones where, sort of double winching, two vehicles nose to nose, sort of once you got out the other side, and then, 6 vehicles on short snatch straps and a 7th in the hole. You're walking up basically and just chatting to people. Sort of, how's it going? Sort of offering, is there anything I can do? But generally, everything is so focused around that sort of sharp end that that's quiet moments and then very, very busy moments. So it's just finding a balance between them.
When you were sort of walking down the convoy in Kalimantan, if you came across Sam and Peter from South Africa, was there sort of a kinship with
Yes,
teams?
absolutely. Absolutely.
And yeah. Could you show it, or was that not the done thing?
No, of course you can show it. Yes, if I can play any sort of support role, even if it's moral support for the guys, I would go through days where I wouldn't see them at all because the convoy was so sort of stretched out. I would be further back, so I would be stuck in, at the current hole that they're at. They might be sort of half a mile ahead or a mile ahead, sort of at the next hole already. If they were at the point of the convoy. So sometimes I'd go through a stage where I wouldn't see them for a couple of days. And then for a couple of days, sort of they're just a few vehicles away. And when they're like that, yeah, of course, you're always like stopping in, how's it going, stopping by, sort of grabbing a cup of coffee or, finding out what you can do to help.
Looking back now, what stands out from the events? What kind of what are the moments that kind of stick in your mind? Was it the the challenges you faced when you were competing in 1995, or the spectacular kind of closing ceremony amongst a 2,000-year-old Mayan temple? What do you take away from the experience of Camel Trophy?
The thing that sticks with me more than sort of the ceremonies and that sort of thing of the events. For me, it's the quiet moments that are more memorable. And I've noticed the same thing, sort of in my mountaineering. It's sort of not like standing on the summit of the mountain. Yes, it's emotional. Standing on the summit of the mountain, it's You know, sort of 2 days later, when you're on the trail out and you're sitting, you know, sort of 1 day left on the trail, and you sharing a couple of beers or a bottle of wine that the mules have brought up the trail. You know, sort of that for me sort of is more memorable. Same thing with running ultra marathons. Yeah, you cross the finish line. Wow, the euphoria and the sense of relief. You know, I've had ultra marathons where I cross the line, I'm crying. It's that emotional. But is it as memorable as some of those moments when I'm running with someone, you know, a couple of the guys that I've trained with for a year or two before, and it's a little conversations backwards and forwards and comments and whatever. That for me is the more memorable part. So if I look at the two events, in Munda Maya, the one day we were doing up at Tres Bandeiras, just after Tres Bandeiras, when we came down through into Guatemala. We had stopped sort of quite close to some Mayan ruins, and we landed up, a number of us sort of scrambling up the outside. You know, when I say Mayan ruins, it's basically a mound in the forest, and you couldn't see the top of it because it stuck out above the top of the forest canopy. So 7, 8 of us basically scrambled up the mound to the top, and only when you got to the very top could you see the actual blocks and sort of the construction itself. And we sat up there for half an hour, you know, looking out over the forest canopy. We were sticking up sort of above the forest. And for me, that's sort of probably the most memorable moments in Munda Maya, purely because here we are in the middle of nowhere, absolute middle of nowhere, seeing something that very few people have ever seen. And you're there with your teammates, you know, chatting, you know, something that sort of really sticks with you. For Kalimantan, quite different. One of the washouts, the bridge had gone, you know, bridge a couple of 100 yards long across one of the rivers. So it was a case of assembling the raft units, then taking the vehicles upstream to a logging camp, and reassembling the convoy there on the other side, so where we could get onto a road again. And we were doing that through the night, and it was one of these ones where it would take more than an hour and 10, hour 15 to go. I don't know how far it was, but at nighttime going upriver, and then you would turn the raft unit around and come back down, and 10 minutes, not even 10 minutes, you'd be back at the pickup point. And I can remember there a night, full moon, and this is 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And I've done 3 or 4 of these rotations, sort of taking a vehicle up, letting it disembark, then come back down to the pickup point and pick up the next vehicle. And just on one of those quiet ones, coming back down, so there's 2 of us on the raft unit coming back down, 1 in each motor, and you're there again, you're in the middle of nowhere, you know, something that very few people get to see and experience. And here you are on this river surrounded by jungle and full moon sort of reflecting on the water. Fantastic experience, very memorable.
Well, Paul, thank you very much for sharing with us those memories. I think you've been very generous with your time, very generous with your memories, and thank you for a generous helping of Camel Trophy spirit.
No, absolute pleasure. It's good to talk to people that know about Camel Trophy and understand what you're talking about. You know, sort of, I've done a at work conference talking about teams and team dynamics, and using some examples from Camel Trophy, and people sort of can't relate to it. So it's great to be able to talk to people that I know can understand and the experience.
I suppose we're celebrating the 40th anniversary of the first Camel Trophy. We're also commemorating the last Camel Trophy, which was 20 years ago. It kind of remains to remains our responsibility to kind of keep that Camel Trophy spirit alive and kind of save it for the next generation.
Yeah, yeah.
So
absolutely.
So Paul Leslie Smith, mountaineer, world record holding skydiver, and two-time Camel Trophy participant. Thank you very much. We'll draw it to a close. Thank you for your time, and we'll speak again.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Been a pleasure. Absolute pleasure.